Hi, I'm Gina George, one half of the interim artistic directing team here at Magenta Theater and director of 13 Spooky Stories. We have 11 actors that have adapted and recorded and acted in their own spooky stories. They're amazing. So please, if you can, and you enjoy watching them as much as we enjoyed filming them, please give a little donation so we can continue to bring you some fun content. These stories are appropriate for kids about 10 and older, but please, if you think that they can't handle it, review it yourself first. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy 13 Spooky Stories.
What's this? A children's campfire? Oh, storytelling. Halloween fun. Oh, this won't do. I must curse it, so that every story told here will come true. Wait now, what is that curse they use? Oh yes. Thrice the brinded cat hath mewed. Thrice and once the hedge-pin whined. Harpier cries, 'tis time, 'tis time. Round about the cauldron go, in the poisoned entrails throw. Toad that under cold stone, days and nights is 31. Sweltered venom, sleeping got, boil thou first in the charmed pot. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. Fillet of a fenny snake, in the cauldron boil and bake. Eye of newt and tongue of frog, wool of bat and tongue of dog. Adder's fork and blind worm's sting, lizard leg and owlet's wing. For a charm of powerful trouble, like a hell broth boil and bubble. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. Scale of dragon, tooth of wolf, witch's mummy, boar and gulf. By the ravined salt sea shark, root of hemlock digged the dark. Liver of blaspheming Jew, gall of goat and slips of ewe. Nose of Turk and Tartar's lips, slivered in the moon's eclipse. Finger of bird strangled babe, ditch delivered by a drab. Make the gruel thick and slab. Add thereto a tiger's children, for the ingredients of our cauldron. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. Cool it with a baboon's blood, then the charm is firm and good. By the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes.
One night, a woman went out for drinks with her friends. was getting fairly late, so she left the bar. She got into her car and got onto a deserted highway. A couple miles down the road, she noticed she was low on gas, so she pulled into a gas station. She got frightened by the odd behavior of the attendant. He kept trying to get her to get out of her car and join him in his office. She refused, and she drove away as fast as she could. Not long after, she noticed a lone pair of headlights in the rearview mirror approaching fast. The car got up right up behind her, dangerously close to her tailgate, and flashed its bright lights. Well, now she was starting to get nervous. The car flashed its bright lights on and off, and the driver seemed to be shouting. He was waving his hands at her. Through every twist and turn, it followed her all the way home until she pulled into her driveway. She was terrified. She made a mad dash for her house and she called the police. At the same time, the other driver got out of the car and he yelled at her, "Lock your door, call the police, call 911! But when the police got there, the terrible truth was revealed. The driver had been trying to save her. When he pulled up behind her, his bright lights illuminated the back of her car. He could see the dark silhouette of a man rising up from the back seat of the car, an axe in his hand, and he flashed his lights to warn her. When the police got there, guns drawn, and they opened the car door. He was gone. He had escaped into the night. They searched all around, but they couldn't find him. The police dispatcher, she came out on the radio and she told them that he was an escaped maniac from a hospital for the criminally insane. Well, it was a terrifying night for the woman. She was lucky to escape with her life. To this day, the killer still walks the lone highways at night, waiting for his next ride.
Used to hear tell the story a long time ago. Goes like this: a couple boys out driving a country road headed to Canterbury for a fall dance, and they saw a young lady on the side of the road with her thumb out. And they stopped and asked her if she'd like a ride, and she said, "Hey, I was wondering if you could take me home." The boy said, "Well, as it was, we were heading to a dance, wondering if you'd like to come too." And the young lady said, that's fine to me." So she got in the back seat, and it being a cold fall evening, she asked to borrow one of their overcoats. So he handed one back to her, and they went to the dance in town and just had a right hoot of a time. And when the time was right, they took her home, dropped her off, and they was about halfway home when one of the boys said, I forgot to get my overcoat." And the other boy said, "Well, I suppose we can get back in the morning and get it from her." So next morning they drove to the house. The old lady's there sitting on the porch looking very sad. They went and asked her about the young girl. The lady looked up with very sad eyes and said, "Well, yeah, that's my daughter. She's been dead nigh on 12 years now." The lady said she was killed in a car accident at that very intersection. And she pointed to the cemetery, the road a piece, and said she's buried there. And, well, the boys didn't believe it, and you wouldn't either, but when they took off to the cemetery, started looking around, and over in the distance they saw that overcoat draped over a headstone. And on the headstone was inscribed the girl's name and the date of her death, exactly 12 years ago to the day. Yeah?
This story takes place not that long ago and not that far away. There is a country north of here where winter lasts 7 long months. But this particular winter was much longer, and people were running out of food and firewood. Out on the edge of the barren snowscape was a cottage, and there was an old man and an old woman who lived there. The old woman was looking very ill, very anxious. "Oh, my husband, I am so cold, and I am so hungry. Look, my hands are blue. I know I'm going to die." "Oh, there, my darling. Soon spring will come, and we will have food again." She looked so ill and so anxious that after a while he finally relented and decided to go in search of food. But, he said, you must promise me one thing. You must not burn these 2 logs. We must have them to cook the food that I will bring. Oh, anything, just find me some food. And so he left across the snow, and she sat by the fire and kept warm and waited, and he did not return. Where is he? The fire is going out. And she had an idea. I will take one of these logs and put it on the fire, and we will still have one left to cook the food that he will bring. And she put it on the fire. Whoosh! Oh, the flames were warm, and she felt much better. She forgot how hungry she was. And so by the fire, she waited. Still he did not come. Oh, where is he? He has found food and left me to die. Oh, and the fire was going out. Then she had an idea. I will put the last log on the fire, and it will be nice and hot when he brings the food so we can cook it. And so she did. Oh, yes, bright, hot flames. She forgot really how hungry she was. And she waited, and still he did not come. And the fire was going out. It was really only an ember, and she reached out to it and burnt. Oh, it started to bleed. That's good, she said. And she started to chew. She chewed her arm and her back, other arm, until there was nothing left but a skeleton. That was good, but I am still hungry. I want meat. Just then there was a rustling at the door. Her husband had come home and brought 2 rabbits for them. Look, my darling, I brought us food. She ran and she grabbed the rabbits and she ate one and ate the other. Oh, that was good, but I am still hungry. I want meat. Oh, my husband. I didn't realize how meaty you are. Come here. I am going to eat you. And with that, he burst out the door and ran across the snow as fast as he could. She followed him. I will eat you. I want meat. And he ran. Fortunately, he was much faster than she was. And he ran and he could hear her voice in the background. I want meat. And he ran and suddenly he was at a gorge. It was as far as he could see this way and as far as he could see that way. There was no way across. And then he saw a cabin. And he went to it. And he knocked on the door. And inside there was a boy. Yes? May I help you? My wife has gone crazy. She's going to eat me. You have to help me cross the gorge. Very well then. But first you must get me a bucket of water. You want water? She's going to eat me. Yes. Very well. So he found a bucket. He dipped it in the well, and he brought her some water. And she took a ladle out of her apron and sipped the water. Very good. Now I will help you. And so they went to the edge of the gorge, and she stamped her feet into the ground, and she stretched her arm. She stretched her clear across the gorge and grabbed onto a tree. Now you may go. He climbed up the woman. He walked across her arm, across the gorge until he hit ground. She saw that he'd made it, let go of the tree, and she snapped back to where she came from, and she went back into her cottage. Just then, the skeleton lady arrived. I knocked on the door. I want meat. He went open the door and said, may I help you? Oh, you are too skinny to eat. You must help me. Of course I will help you, but first, you must get me a drink of water. I will eat you anyway. You help me now. Very well. And so she went to the edge of the gorge, and she stamped her feet into the ground, and she stretched her arm, stretched it clear across the gorge, grabbed onto the tree. The skeleton lady climbed with her, and she walked across. I want meat. My husband, I will find you. I want meat. And the woman saw she was about halfway across. Let go of the tree. Her arms snapped back, and she went back into her cabin. And the skeleton lady said, I want into 1,000,000 pieces. Well, as I said, this story took place not long ago and not far away. They say there is magic in each one of the skeleton ladies' bones, and that one day they will all come together in search of meat.
There are many amulets, artifacts, potions, spells, talismans, and other forms of magic in the world. Some are light, some are very dark. Many are a mix of the two. I am here to tell you of one of them. The Colonel had just returned from his tours of duty. He had many tales of battles and bravery, of strange people, stranger places, and even stranger things. The family he was visiting, Mr. and Mrs. White and their son Herbert, listened with rapt attention. Then he produced the monkey's paw. An old Indian fakir had put a spell on it. He believed that life was ruled by fate, and there were dire consequences for anyone who tried to change it. The monkey's paw would give 3 wishes to the one who possessed it. The first man who had it had his 3 wishes. I do not know what the first 2 were, but the third was for the sweet release of death. That is how it came into my possession. But he would not speak of his 3 wishes, and when pressed, he just stared off into the darkness, as if seeing horrors that only he could see. Then, without warning, he threw the monkey's paw into the fire, while Mr. White quickly retrieved it before it could come to harm. I threw that into the fire, and that's where it belongs. If you use it, then whatever happens will not be on my head. If you have any sense, you will throw it back in the fire as well. Mr. White would do no such thing. Of course, he didn't believe in magic. But one always hopes, doesn't one? And one always has to try. Well, the night wore on, and eventually the Colonel took his leave, and the family turned their attention to the paw. "We could be rich and famous," said Herbert. "Wish to be a king, Father." Mr. White said, "Well, to be honest, I don't know what to wish for. I have everything I need." "It would be nice if we could pay off the house," said Mrs. White. "Yes, wish for that, Father." Feeling foolish, he sheepishly lifted up the monkey's paw and said, "I wish for the money to pay off the house." Immediately screamed and dropped it. It moved. It squirmed in my hand like a snake. "Oh, I'm sure that was your imagination," said Mrs. White. "I don't see any money," said Herbert. "And I don't suppose I ever shall." But as they prepared for bed that evening, they all felt inexplicably uneasy. But the next day brought a new day, sunshine, and new hope. "Oh, I guess that's the way it is with soldiers," said Mrs. White. "They tell the stories to the gullible. I can't believe that we fell for that. Magic. Wishes." Mr. White said, "Well, he did tell us that when it happens, it would happen in a very natural way. So if you didn't know better, you would never make the connection." "Well," said Herbert, standing up from the breakfast table, "if the money does arrive today, then don't spend it before I get home." And he left for work. The old couple spent the morning doing their daily tasks, and then at noon there was a knock at the door. They invited the stranger in. He was uncomfortable and very nervous. "I come from the manufacturing plant," he said. "I'm terribly sorry to tell you this, but there's been an accident. Your son was caught in one of the machines, and he didn't survive. The company sent me to say that they don't accept any liability in this situation, but they did want to make some small token." And he presented them with a check. The check was the exact amount needed to pay off the mortgage. Well, the days went on. They buried their son. They knew there would be no healing in their hearts. And then one night, Mr. White was awakened with a start as his wife screamed, "The paw! The monkey's paw!" He lit a candle and asked, What are you on about? What's going on? She said, "We still have 2 wishes left. Wish for our son to be alive again." "Oh, you don't know what you're wishing for. He's been buried for 10 days, and, well, I didn't have the heart to tell you this, but even after the accident, he was barely recognizable. What would he be today?" "I don't care," she said. "He's my son. Go find the monkey's paw." And he left the room, and he went into the living room, and over the fireplace he felt on the mantle until he found the monkey's paw in the darkness. He brought it back to the room. "Wish," she said. "Oh, this is a very foolish and wicked thing to do." "Wish," she said. With trepidation, he lifted up the paw and said, "I wish for our son to be alive again," and immediately dropped it as it squirmed again in his hand. But there was nothing. He went into the living room and lit a match, terrified that he would see an abomination that he couldn't escape. But again, there was nothing. The match burnt out, and he lit a second, and just as he did, there was a faint knock at the door. He froze, paralyzed, not even breathing, just listening. And then there was a second knock. He ran into the bedroom and closed the door as a third knock came. "What was that?" said Mrs. White. It was nothing," said Mr. White. It was rats. It was the house settling." "No, it's my son. It's Herbert. We must let him in." He grabbed her before she could leave the room. "Please, whatever you do, don't let that thing into the house." But she would not have it. She wrestled free and said, "It's my son. How could I be afraid of him? How could you be afraid of our son? I'm coming, Herbert." She left the room and called over her shoulder, "Help me with the top latch. You know I can't reach it." But her husband was down on his hands and knees, searching desperately and wildly for the monkey's paw. If only he could find it before that thing outside came in. He heard a chair slide toward the door, heard as his wife undid the top latch, just as he found the monkey's paw and made his third and final wish. The knocking immediately stopped, but the sound reverberated throughout the house. He heard the chair slide back. He heard the door open, and he felt the night wind come into the house. Then he heard his wife's disappointed and pained scream, which alone gave him the courage to join her at the front door. Then they went out to the gate. The light opposite shone on nothing but an empty, deserted road. How about you? Be careful what you wish for. You just may receive it.
Esther and her mom were heading back from visiting her aunt by the ocean side, when all of a sudden, a great big storm came in. Sheets of rain pouring down. Could hardly see what was in front of you. So, Mom decided to look for shelter. Luckily for them, they found a little inn with green shutters. When you get through the downpour and head into the lobby, there's a nice lady at the desk. "How can I help you?" she asks. "We need a room for the night," Mom says. "Terrible weather we're having." The woman nods and gets them set up for the night in a nice, cozy room. And they stay the night, resting peacefully. The next day, they come down to the lobby to see that the lady isn't there. Strange, but not unusual. Maybe she's around the inn. But they look. Hello? Nothing. So, Mom decides to just set it on a little note on the table with cash for the night. And as they head out, they realize that they need to get some gas. So they stop by a gas station just a few miles down, and the attendant helps them out. And while they're chatting, the mom asks the gas station attendant, do you know the name of that inn just down the road? The one with the green shutters? I can't remember the name of it. And the attendant looked back at her. Green shutters, he said. Why, that inn burned down weeks ago with the owner inside. Terrible accident. Well, when Mom heard this, she couldn't believe her ears. And she heads back. But instead of a cute little inn, there's nothing but a burned corpse in the building. But as they approach the ruins, there's a little bit of furniture where the lobby used to be. And on that little table, singed with fire, a note with Mom's writing on it.
Gather round, children. I want to tell you a story. It's about Maddie and Sue. They were the two best friends. They did everything together. They went to the same school. They played on the same sports teams. They played games together. They did everything together. They were the best of friends. Well, one night, Sue was spending the night at Maddie's house, and they decided they wanted to tell a ghost story. And Maddie remembers a story that her older brother told her about how if you took a knife and stabbed it into a grave, the person buried there would reach up, grab you, and pull you down into the grave. Well, Sue didn't believe the story, and Maddie agreed, but she was still afraid, even if it was just a story. Well, Sue laughed and said, "Ha, I don't believe it. It's just a hoax. I would do it." So Maddie decided she was going to call Sue's bluff and dared her to go down to the cemetery, down the street in the dark of night. Well, they go down to the kitchen. Well, they find a flashlight, a knife. And as they're sitting there, Maddie begins to think, this dare is silly. And she gets a little concerned and scared for Sue. And she begs Sue not to go. But Sue says, it's just a hoax. And off into the dark night she goes. Well, after a little while, Maddie's sitting at the kitchen table. And 15 minutes goes by and there's no Sue. 20 minutes goes by, still no Sue. Well, after 30 minutes, Maddie is really concerned and scared for her friend, so she runs upstairs, wakes up her parents in their bedroom, and crying into her mother's arm, she tells her mom and dad what had happened. And with that, her father runs down the stairs, grabs the flashlight, and off into the dark night, down to the cemetery he goes. Well, after a little while, Maddie's father comes home. He's all pale and shaken, and in a solemn voice, he tells Maddie and her mother what he had found. He had found Sue all right, dead on a grave with completely white hair. Well, the police were called, and after listening to Maddie's explanation, they decided that Sue's death was an accident. That Sue went to grab the knife, and as she went to stab it into the grave, she froze in fear. She couldn't move, thinking that a hand from underneath grabbed her. She died of fright.
Creak! A sound. Faint. Distant, but still heard. Crack! Like something snapping or being trampled on. I sat in my room reading. No sound except for the crackling fire. Creak! Must be the house settling. Crack! Perhaps some animals outside. Whoosh! Was that the wind? I went to the window and looked out. It was a beautiful night, no one around, just a brilliant moon. I went back to my book. Creak! It's nothing. Crack! I'm gonna be so foolish. Must be windy tonight. Thump! Was that from inside the house? I stared into the fire, trying to calm my jangled nerves. Creak! Crack! Whoosh! I hear there's so many noises. Thump! 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 Is it getting closer? I closed my eyes, trying to think of anything else. Creak! Thump! Crack! Thump! Whoosh! Thump! 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 It is getting closer. Reach the door. Thump! I tried to peer through the door, see what was out there. Thump! Thump! What could it be? Creak! Is it the floorboard? Thump! I reached for the door. Thump! I couldn't stand it any longer. Thump! I opened the...
I'll tell you a story. A story about a woman that you may recognize her name, you may not. But she was famous in her time. Emily Calypso. She was a prodigist. She was playing the piano at age 3. Fantastic young lady. By the time she was a teenager, she was packing concert houses across the world. People could not get enough of listening to her. Life is cruel. And by the time she was in her early 20s, her body was succumbing to arthritis. The pain was overwhelming. Took her once slender fingers that flowed flawlessly across the keys. They started to curl up and become gnarled until she was left with claws rather than fingers and hands. The pain was enormous. She couldn't escape it. She could no longer play the piano. But she lived on. In fact, lived so long that she outlived all of her friends and family. While she couldn't play, she still loved music. And returning from a concert of a young pianist that she had been following, she was returning home. And the emotions of that music and memories of what she used to do so overwhelmed her that she had to stop. She couldn't make it home. And as luck would have it, there was a amazing hotel she had never seen before. It was huge. And clearly it had once been beautiful, but now it was very run down. In fact, she wasn't sure if it was even open, but she stopped anyway. She went in the lobby, and there was a man at the counter, very run down, much like the hotel itself, dirty, smelly. Probably the most striking thing she noticed about him was the fact that he had no teeth. But he was nice, gave her a key to the room, and as she was headed there, he called out to her. She turned back and he gave her a wink and said, "Enjoy your stay." And she made it to her room. She's in a lot of pain, took some pain pills, and laid down on a bed that was much more comfortable than it looked. She immediately fell asleep. And sometime in the night, she was awoken by the sound of a piano playing. She thought that was strange because she surely would have noticed a piano when she walked in to the lobby. But she was curious. As she sat up, she realized she wasn't dreaming. She could still hear the music, so she got out of bed and went down to the lobby to see where the music was coming from. When she got there, she saw a grand piano and a man playing. As he turned and looked at her, she realized it was the man at the counter. But he wasn't dirty and drabby and smelly. In fact, he was wearing a tuxedo with tails, and he was playing beautifully. It was something she had never heard before, but she was amazed and entranced by it. He beckoned her to come over and sit down, and as he finished, she wished she could have applauded, but her hands. He asked her to play for him, and she said, "I can't play anymore." He said, "I think you can. Play for me." And she looked down at her fingers, and they just unfurled. Were no longer those claws, but the long, slender fingers she used to have. She's amazed by this. He said, "Play." She touched the keys and realized there was no pain either. So she started playing one of her favorite pieces by Beethoven. And as she played, she felt energy and emotions flooding into her. She was playing better than she had ever played. Her fingers flew across the keys. There was no hesitation. And as she finished the song, the man stood up and applauded her. And she looked at him and realized he looked much younger than he did before. And he handed her some sheet music and asked, "Play this for me." She looked at the music, and it's something she had never seen before. So complicated, it seemed no one would be able to play this piece. He said, "Play." She took a deep breath and started playing. It was a complicated piece, but as she played, she felt so energized as she was playing more and more flawlessly, and the happiness and energy. It was beautiful music, and she realized she didn't need to look at the sheet music anymore. She just knew it by heart. And as she played, she noticed the room was getting brighter, and as she glanced around, she started seeing people, and they weren't just people, they were her friends and family that she had lost so long ago. They were all standing there around her. They were all so happy and encouraging her. And she played with even more energy, and emotions welled up in her. She was crying. She was so happy. And indeed, at the moment the music climaxed, she realized that man was no longer there. It was just her friends and family pressed in close, smiling, laughing, crying. And when she hit the last note of the song, they all applauded. But it seemed the applause was more than they could do. It seemed as if the applause was coming from all over the world. billions of people applauding her. She had never been happier. As she stood up, she caught a reflection in the window. She was no longer the old woman that had entered the hotel. She was the beautiful young lady she was when she had played the piano flawlessly so many years ago. Her friends and family started escorting her away, and she noticed the light in the room was coming from the center, and it was so bright it was almost blinding. And they pulled her towards it. She glanced back at the piano she had just been playing and saw an old woman slumped over the keys. At that moment, she realized she had played her last performance.
They're always watching. Let me tell you a story. One time, when there was a boy, he knew they were watching him. They were always talking about him, like, look at him. Look at what he's doing. He knew. He became a bigger boy, and he was more aware of them watching. So he became a man, and he decided I was tired of being watched. And he went out into the woods, further and further, so they wouldn't watch him. But they kept watching him, so he kept moving into the woods further, until it got very, very dark, and no one for sure could see him. One day, the moon, like it is tonight, is full. It told him, they're looking for you. They're going to find you. They're going to watch you. So he knew what he had to do. He put on his invisibility jacket, got into his bed, and waited. That night, all of a sudden, at the foot of his bed, he saw all the eyes. They were all watching him. He didn't move. But then when the eyes all looked at him, he knew. He knew what he had to do. He slowly grabbed his gun and shot at them all. Let out a terrible scream because those eyes got into the man's feet and he blew off his toes. Always be watching.
Oh, come here, sweetheart. Sit down next to your grandma. I'm so glad you told me about your new boyfriend. Summer romances, they're the best. I had a summer romance once. His name was Danny. I remember it like it was yesterday. Getting ready for a date that night. I couldn't decide what to wear, so I called up my friend Karen, and we talked about it and finally decided on my blue dress, the one with the full skirt and the ribbon around the back. And as I got ready, I was listening to the radio, and there was a story came on about a lunatic that escaped from the asylum. He was a murderer, and they called him the Hook because he only had one hand, and he had a hook for the other. But I didn't care about that. I was too excited about my date with Danny. He picked me up in his new sports car. I felt like a queen. We went to the drive-in. We picked up his sister Jeannie and her boyfriend Mike in the forest. Had a good time at the drive-in. It was so romantic. After the movie, we dropped off Mike and Jeannie, and he drove me up to the overlook outside of town. It must have been the blue dress. We sat and we looked at the stars and we listened to the radio and we kissed. Oh, I know you can't imagine your grandmother ever kissing a boy, but I was young once. Oh, but then on the radio there was that story again. The one about the lunatic with the hook. And there. And the asylum was right on the edge of town, not very far from where we were. And I said to Danny, I wanted to go home. And he just got mad at me. He said I was trying to spoil the evening, and we argued. And I got scared, and I started to cry, and he just got madder, and it was terrible. And then there was a thump or something on the side of the car, and I said, Danny, that's it. We're getting out of here. And he whipped the car into gear, and he peeled on out of there. But he wasn't scared. He was just mad at me for spoiling his evening. He drove home in silence. He didn't say a word. He pulled up to my house and just pulled in, and I didn't even wait for him to come around and open my car door. I opened it myself, and I slammed it shut, and I screamed. Danny came around to see what was the matter, and I pointed. There, hanging from the door handle, was a hook with a bloody stump.
Well, I used to live on a farm way out in the country. And every year my dad would plant scarecrows. He thought they'd keep the crows away, but then he also thought they'd ward off evil spirits. He was kind of superstitious. And every year he'd bring out the same ones, these old worn-out scarecrows, and, they never worked. So this October came like any other October, and leaves were changing and falling, and it was getting cooler, and I was thinking about Halloween, and one afternoon I thought, man, what if I built this new scarecrow? Something just really cool. So I worked really hard. It took me a long time, but I built the ugliest, most frightening scarecrow you could ever imagine. I was so proud of myself. I remember Mom calling for supper, and right before I went in, I planted it, but I planted it so I could see it from my upstairs bedroom window. Well, we went into supper, and halfway through supper, this storm just came out of nowhere. Man, there was lightning and thunder, and wind and rain, and we all thought the power was going to go out, but it didn't. And, then eventually it was time for bed, and right before I got into bed, I looked out. I wanted to see my scarecrow again. I remember the night just being very dark. It was way out in the country, and all of a sudden there was this flash of lightning, and I looked down where I thought I'd see my scarecrow, only it had moved. It seemed like it had moved a couple feet to the left and went dark again. I was watching, and another flash of lightning, and I looked, and it was a little bit to the right. I was scratching my head going, what in the world? Until the lightning came again, and in 1 minute it was here, then it was here, it was by the tree, and then it was by the barn, and finally, this last flash of lightning, it looked like it was going to come in the house. It was a long day, and I was tired, and I rubbed my eyes. I thought, I've got to be imagining things. So I went to sleep, but somewhere in the middle of the night, there was this loud clap of thunder. I remember getting really curious. I thought, I'm going outside. So I put my boots on, got my coat on, went outside, and the night wasn't raining, it was misty, and just damp, and very dark. I was walking around trying to find that thing, and I didn't get very far before I tripped over a branch, fell and landed on my back in the wet grass, and never forget it, when I looked up, that scarecrow was looking right down on me. It had eyes glowing as red as the devil. Well, I jumped up. I ran in the house so quick, it reminded me of my sister seeing a garter snake. Well, I went back to sleep and woke up in the morning. The sun was shining. Went downstairs. There was coffee on. Mom was cooking bacon. Dad was frying his potatoes. And I sat through breakfast, but I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. And then after breakfast, we went out and looked around. Dad was looking for the buildings to see if there was any damage. Me, I was looking for my scarecrow. And I didn't see it anywhere. I looked and couldn't find it. I could see the other scarecrows. A couple of them had fallen down. And Dad said, don't worry about it. We'll find it. Show up in the harvest, but I never saw it. And I remember standing there, so confused I started crying. And not because I'd lost my scarecrow. This is just pure, unadulterated fear. Years passed and I never saw that scarecrow. I always wondered, what happened that night? Do scarecrows ward off evil spirits, or did mine get possessed by one? Well, Dad eventually sold the farm. We moved to the city. I got married and had kids, and to this day, I have never been outside in a store again.
Why, isn't this nice being out here in nature with a little campfire underneath the light of a full moon? Why, full moons remind me of my mama and daddy. You see, it was a full moon the night my daddy proposed to my mama. He was in the town square waiting for mama, and there was still a little nip in the air, but daddy could smell spring coming, and as he jingled the engagement ring in his pocket, well, he just knew a June wedding would be perfect for the two of them. Well, he saw mama coming down the path, and he ran to her and picked her up and swung her around in his arms while mama squealed with delight. Daddy gently put mama down on a park bench. He kneeled in front of her and he said, "Sally, I love you and I want you to be my wife. Will you marry me?" Oh, mama giggled with delight and said, "Yes, Billy, I'll marry you." Why, Daddy gazed at mama with love in his eyes. His eyes dropped down and saw the red velvet ribbon around mama's neck, the one she always wore. Well, Daddy was curious, and he asked her. He said, "Sally, why do you always wear that red velvet ribbon?" My mama just smiled and said, "I must never take off my red ribbon." Well, Daddy was in love, and he let it go. But true to his word, June came along, and they were married. Daddy bought a lovely little house in a nice neighborhood, and they moved in. Why, Daddy bought Mama plenty of beautiful party dresses, but with every dress, Mama always wore her red velvet ribbon. Well, Daddy thought this was odd, but Mama would always just smile and say, "I must never take off my red ribbon." Well, the years passed, and Mama found out she was going to have a baby. Yes, you guessed it, little old me. Well, Daddy was ecstatic with the news. Well, Mama started talking to all her friends who had babies, and Daddy talked to his buddies who had children, and late at night they'd stay up talking about all they had learned until the big day finally came. Well, Mama was fretting because she wanted Daddy to promise to tell that doctor not to take off her red velvet ribbon. Well, Daddy was frustrated, but he didn't want to upset Mama anymore, and so he promised. Well, after I was born, Daddy brought Mama a big bouquet of flowers, and Mama was awfully grateful for those flowers, but even more grateful that Daddy had kept his promise. He told the doctor not to take off her red velvet ribbon. Well, he was frustrated and was about to talk to Mama about that, but Mama just handed over little old me and said, "Billy, this is your baby girl. We're going to call her Wilhelmina, and we'll call her Billy, just like you." But you see, truth be told, I wasn't just like my daddy. You see, I learned to listen to my mama. Over the years, I would sometimes reach for her red ribbon, but Mama would always take my little hands and she'd say, "Now, Billy girl, don't you touch my red ribbon." And I listened to Mama. Well, Daddy was like a dog with a bone, and that red ribbon gnawed on him over the years, until one year he got what he thought was a clever idea. Well, for their anniversary, Daddy took Mama out to a fancy restaurant, and after dinner, he pushed across a beautiful little velvet box, and Mama opened that box, and what do you think was inside? Well, nothing short of a diamond necklace, that's what. Well, Daddy got up and went to put that necklace on her and wanted to take off her red ribbon, but Mama grabbed his hand and stopped him. Well, Daddy went back and sat down in a huff. Mama just put the diamond necklace back in the box and closed it, and she said, "Now, Billy, I love you, and I will always treasure this necklace. But I warn you, don't you ever try and take off my red velvet ribbon again. Well, when they came home that night, I remember it well. It was a full moon just like tonight. Well, that moonlight must have kept Daddy up stewing about that red ribbon. 'Cause that night he got out of bed and he tiptoed around to Mama's side. He reached out his hands and he pulled on the bow of her red ribbon till all that was left was a little slip knot. Why, he pulled off her red ribbon, pop went her head and rolled across and landed in front of the window under the moonlight. Well, her eyes flashed open and she said, I warned you. Oh, poor Daddy. I do miss him, bless his little heart. But he had been warned. Well, at least I still have Mama. Well, part of her anyway. I guess we best get going. But let me leave you with this. If a woman tells you not to fuss with the ribbon around her neck, you best listen to her. Y'all have a nice night, you hear?